Good evening. I'm Terrie Curry here in Denver for the Awesomism Book Club. And I have Karilyn Gomez from Santa Margarita with me and Meredith Gross from Maryland. Would you guys like to say hi? Karilyn?
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be back again. Hello, Terrie. Hello, Meredith. I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we will be having tonight because these are juicy chapters.
Yes.
Meredith?
Hi. Yes, hi, I'm Meredith. I'm from Maryland. Here we have Karilyn from California and Meredith from Maryland. And it's always fun to be with you guys and also with our audience. And I do think that these are very meeting chapters. And as I was reading them again today, I was like tearing up in places. And so there's a lot of good heartfelt bits in here.
Great. Thank you. Yes, we will be covering chapters 7 and 8. So I'm excited about these chapters too because they do have a lot in them and just a lot of fun things to discuss. So starting with chapter 7, Suzy in chapter 7 talks a lot about self-care. And so, Meredith, you want to start out just kind of maybe mentioning some of the things she says about self-care and how important it is?
Yes, yes. So I love this chapter. It's called Now, What About You? And as a parent of 2 highly energetically sensitive children myself, I've been taught a lot about this and about how important self-care is. So as much as this is chapter 7, in some ways I'm always like, move this to the front because in some ways you want to focus on your child and all you can do for them and have them be as much as they can be to their potential. But it really ultimately comes down to your own self-journey and how you heal yourself, care for yourself, love yourself. And your children will reflect that to you. They will show you where there's still a bit of a rub and ultimately encourage you to have that self-care because it's a necessity for this kind of child and this kind of parenting environment.
Yes, and I love where she says it's one thing to have a weird kid, and it's another thing to have a weird kid with a weird parent.
I know. It's like, yes.
So going further into that, Karilyn, you want to talk about that? How we all feel that way when we start listening more to our children and being more out there. So
Self-care is a real, it can be a real enigma to us a lot of times because we are so programmed or conditioned to take care of other people first, especially our family. And especially when you have a challenging situation with highly sensitive, energetically sensitive children. So I would agree with you, Meredith. It would be nice to see that up and a little bit closer to the front. Although most of us, regardless of whether our children are highly on that spectrum or not somewhere else, that we would tend not to look at it there because our focus is on the children. So we want to do that part first. Like, okay, we've kind of got that taken care of. Then I can take care of me.
I agree. I don't think I needed to learn the importance of this, but I didn't start here. And I think that is why Suzy puts it toward the end, is most parents don't start with, child is born, how do I take care of me? You do kind of immerse yourself in your child, and then you kind of learn by trial and error that, oh my gosh, this is really important. And it's not just self-care, it's that connection to self, and it's that love of self. So it's not just like, oh, I'm going to take a nap and a rest, which by all means is one element. It's more having that connection to know I am tired beyond all reason and I need a rest. Or, I am so sad and overwhelmed. I need to just watch a comedy show for 30 minutes. So again, it's that self-care that comes from that connection and love of self.
Yes, and she talks about not hiding all of that, to not hide your emotions, and that fits right into self-care because maybe it's just really letting yourself acknowledge to everyone where you are at.
Well, and I think what Meredith was saying too is if we choose not to look at that, our kids are really good at reflecting that pretty quickly. So we always have that opportunity, again, to look at self and acknowledge what it is that we're feeling and let that be okay.
For me, that was a huge personal shift to acknowledge out loud to my children what I'm feeling in a matter-of-fact way. And it you know, I don't know about you guys, I wasn't raised hearing my mother talk about how frustrated she was in the moment. You know, no, that's not how we spoke. And I think also there was a parenting model that said, you know, your parents needed to at least act in charge and in command and in control, even if that was not the case. And so I think it is kind of a huge shift to, as a parent, have that vulnerability and say, you know, right now I need a timeout. I am really frustrated. I'm not handling this well. I will get back to you in a few minutes. And that has been, that's been hugely a positive impact between me and my children.
Yes, and she talks about doing things like meditation, walking, yoga, finding something, even if it's away from your children, to get involved in where it does bring you back to yourself. So, Karilyn or Meredith, did any of those things, any particular thing work for you?
For me, walking is my meditation, because it not only, I think, it gives me something physical to do, excuse me, it also puts me in touch with the elements, and it just kind of calms everything down. So there have been times when it was safe to do this. I would just leave and take a walk, which helped kind of bring me back to recognizing what it was I was feeling without any emotion and not without any judgment about what it was that I was feeling, and be able to go back into the situation and handle it with ease. Excuse me, I have to go get a dog. Sorry, buddy.
It's so funny because I was just going to say, yes, I love walking, and I also love to meditate. And that was something, again, more when the kids were napping or asleep. And I always noticed that the more able I was to allow thoughts to come and go, the more I was able to allow my children to have thoughts come and go. You know, I wouldn't get so stuck on their moods. I would just kind of have that position of the observer to allow them to move through what they're experiencing. And then also having a dog, I think, for us as a family has been a real exercise in being present and just having that tactile experience and that that care for some other creature and that sense of presence, I think, was really helpful. So I'm just laughing. There was like, oh, I'll talk about my dog, and then Karilyn's dog comes sniffing around.
My dog needed some help.
Yeah. Yes, and she talks also about this whole sense of not being alone, and like when your children are throwing tantrums, you know, if you're in the public, no matter who your child is, if you're in public in an airport or any place, if when your child starts throwing a tantrum or gets really definite and willful, there is a tendency to completely feel alone, because you do sense that the world out there, many of those people are really in judgment of what's going on, because everybody has their viewpoint about how and what you should do to calm a child, quiet a child, or whatever. So, yeah, do you want to comment on that, how to deal with that?
You know, what I have found more and more is that when something like that happens, yes, you do have people who will judge it, but I'm finding that there are more often people who will offer some help in some kind of way, because we've all been through it in some manner at some time. And I just find there's a lot more, like a growing sense of community in shared experiences, so it's not just the judgment and making someone feel wrong that may have been experienced more frequently in the past.
Well, this was a real hot button of embarrassment for me, I will say. Like, literally, when Sam was a toddler, we did not leave any store without screaming, kicking, me holding, you know, and it was mortifying for me. And as we've progressed and as I've looked at things and grown, I could see where it was more the people were doing me the service of mirroring that attitude that I was wrong, because I was feeling like I had no idea what I was doing and that everything was wrong. My kid was wrong. I was not doing it right. And so the more I've settled into finding my own way and appreciating my unique child and how we've worked that out, one, I get that far less, you know, like Karilyn was talking about. And when it does happen, it's more like, oh, okay, so they do it that way and we do it this way, and there's not a sting to it. So I would encourage somebody, if they're really having a hard time feeling that embarrassment and that shame around it, look at where you're judging yourself for being wrong.
Yeah, it's like it goes back to loving yourself, to taking care of yourself.
Yeah, right. So really a matter of, if you can in those moments, or even not in those moments, really just think of letting the walls down, because I know everybody really wants to be strong and take care of everything and be able to do it all themselves, but there is something about if you can just relax into it and just really think of letting the barriers come down in those moments when you feel the most vulnerable, even with your children. So, okay, and then she goes on in and talks about teachers and doctors and about educating and advocating, and I thought this was really important, because a lot of times we see this role as just you know, taking care of our child or taking care of us and being able to express ourselves, but really it's about when you educate and advocate, you're really changing the world. You're really giving the doctor, the teacher, the choice to step up and hear and change and be more open, and that's really a big part of this whole process with these children. I think it's not just about you, your child, your family. It's about this whole movement in changing or, you know, making people aware of differences, different way to live, different way to be. So either of you can chime in on that one.
Well, I had an experience when my older son was switched over from Montessori to public school. He had gone through Montessori through the 3rd grade. It was a great experience, and when he went to public school, it was such a shock that he had a real challenge even being in the classroom. There were some times that he would beat us home. We dropped him off at school. But what came of that was there was a school psychologist who said, well, just let him come down to my room. He can do all his classwork there, and then when he's ready to go back in the classroom, he can. And that went on for probably 2 or 3 months, and then he fit back into the classroom. It was fine. But at the end of that year, the teacher, who was very traditional, very strict, and this was totally outside his realm of experience, when he talked to us at the parent conference, he was saying, this was such a good experience for me because I learned that there are kids who are different, who need to learn in a different way.
That's great.
And it works.
That's great, Karilyn.
So it was a huge admission for him that I really appreciated hearing, which supports just exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. And I love that story, and I too feel like we are giving professionals an opportunity to learn and to view things differently, much like I try to be as open as I can to their vantage point, and so that we work together. And I would just say that I always looked for what the connection was between the teacher or the doctor and my child, and for me that was always, that's kind of like nothing's going to happen if that's not there. So I always looked for that. Do they see not just what the issues are and the troublesome areas, but do they see the potential and where he's strong? Are they charmed by him? Do they get him? And that for me was always really important. So we've gone through doctors. We've haven't had to adjust too many teachers. We've been fortunate there, but I definitely see where the more Sam is connected or my daughter's connected to their teacher, the more everyone grows.
So really, in Sam's experience, Meredith, you say you found that most teachers did really connect with him, rather than having great difficulty with seeing his charm or seeing what he could be.
some better than others, and there's this one teacher where at the end of his year with her, she retired to like New Zealand, and we're always like, I think he did her in. I think he did. So, and that was a really hard year for him. He acted out because she was just really traditional and was not having it. So she was kind of done. But I think I wish someone had told me that I can expect that. That I can look for that I can hold out for that, yes, advocate, but if it's really hard at a brick wall, find somewhere that's a little more accommodating. Find that doctor who's willing to see your child and not just, march them through and give them a checkup.
Yeah, and what about doctors? Did you find it was kind of more difficult with doctors to have them link up with the child, and maybe why is that? Why would doctors be more difficult than teachers?
I had this doctor, and Sam, he presented much more on the autism spectrum as a young guy than he does now. And so I had a developmental pediatrician who had a holistic practice, and so she fit my idea of kind of a broader spectrum of tools in your kit. So, and I went to the traditional pediatrician, and I said, I'm doing casein-free, gluten-free, and having some success with it. What do you know? And he even said, he goes, I have about 10 autistic kids in my practice. All the parents do this. They all say it works fine, but I don't know any studies. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me? Like if you have 10 people in your practice and they've all done this and they've all had success, aren't you open and curious a little bit? Could you pass it on to me and say, I don't have the medical background, wouldn't support this necessarily, but anecdotally, this is what I'm seeing in my practice, take it or leave it. So for me, so that's not our doctor, but anymore. But it's just like, come on. I think it's a harder model for them. I think it's just a traditional model. So I think it's harder to be a maverick.
And maybe it's more difficult to be a maverick in medicine than in education. But that was also 10 years ago, right, Meredith? Was that about 10 years ago when you would have been taking Sam to a pediatrician? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm hopeful he's grown, but I don't know.
Yes, it's that medical model is a tough one. It's a tough one. You have anything to say about that, Karilyn?
I think the medical model is it is such a traditional model. I think you have more variability with teaching, and you don't have I don't think you have quite got to be the authority that you have with the medical community, because in a lot of areas, not just with kids on the spectrum, there just tends to be rather a closed, or not closed, a lack of curiosity about new ways to do things or different ways to do things. So it's a go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll be the devil's advocate because there is the money piece. In medicine there is, a lot of money being made in different types of therapies and different types of treatments, whereas you don't really have that in education.
That's true too. Sure.
Yeah, that just doesn't play the part. So whether that's
there's still just can be that lack of curiosity that Meredith was talking about with the doctor. That you've got 10 kids on the autism spectrum. Aren't you curious about this? What is working, and that there seems to be more of a trend in medicine of a lack of curiosity, oftentimes, about what else is possible.
Yeah.
There's a protocol for this particular thing. Isn't there? Is there something else?
Well, and just the doctors I've been exposed to, oftentimes, if they are that way traditional, many times they go into, instead of going into intuition and asking and feeling, they really go into scientific studies and fact. Well, this is fact. What we found true for all people. Once it's the scientific study, then it's fact. So that too plays a part in this whole piece. So,
and I think so too. The educators, frankly, they have more time with your child, and
this is true.
They just don't pat you on the head and say, "See me in a year," or "See me." and frankly, they bear the brunt of the successes and failures of your child. So, like, they're living it, and I think they get more of a chance to see what's effective and what's not effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, then also she mentions, talks a little bit about the children needing to learn to handle their own sensory systems, and she talks about, before you take them into a place. I think, Meredith, you and I have talked about this in your situation, how if you prepare the child in a certain way, either with school or doctors or whatever, then many times it can buffer their reaction, or they can somehow prepare their systems a little bit more readily for something that's going to affect them. Can you think of an example of that, Meredith?
Yes. So I will say that I did vaccinate Sam and my children, but it was always something. Sam really disliked needles in general, giving blood or doing anything. So I always made sure that we didn't go into a well visit, because I never knew when they were scheduled or when they were coming, and I also was a fan of spacing it out. I never thought it made sense to kind of load them all up. I was like, you know what? There's no rush. I'll come back again in 2 weeks, or we'll, let's do this slowly. But for me, so Sam always knew, like, because it was like the fear of the surprise for him around that experience. So I was like, you will never walk into a doctor's office and be like, surprise, it's a shot today. So just knowing that we could kind of prepare ahead of time, and he would kind of know what to expect as much as possible. So I would definitely take a little charge in the doctors and say, well, we're not going to do that today. We weren't prepared for that. And so that was one way to help him kind of modulate what his experience would be.
Yeah. And you found that did help.
It did. It let him know, you have this amount of control over it.
Yeah.
And, I always did my stuff on the side of, intending to get the best from this experience and to have his body protected. And, so I would do some energetic work myself behind the scenes. At that point, he was kind of too young to do it himself. But, now he's older. We talk about, well, what's your intention for this experience? What do you want to get out of this exchange? How do you want to feel about it? What do you want the outcome to be? And so I think as much as each of us can have that clarity for ourselves, again, back to that self-awareness and self-love, what would be loving? And for me, I've also found I won't work with doctors or teachers who, aside from having a connection and support for my child, are equally supportive for me, because it's a hard experience for the parent. And I used to just tough it out and be like, well, it's a knowledgeable doctor and he's good for my child. And then I'd say, well, you know what, he's mean to me, or he doesn't listen to me, or, and so it's kind of like, and since I had that intention, I have found amazing doctors, and they, not surprisingly, you talk to them a little longer, and the ones I've found on my team, they also have children with differences and issues. And so they're compassionate and they're knowledgeable. They support me in a great way and my child. So yes, there's a lot you can do to prepare yourself.
And really with the statistics increasing with kids on the spectrum, I think that's that 1 in 150 in 2008 to 1 in 158 now. You would think, there would be more doctors. I mean, it makes sense. There would probably be more doctors with children of their own on the spectrum. So absolutely. Well, we could now move into Chapter 8. I mean, it's kind of a good place to kind of slip into it, because this chapter is treating autism with pharmaceuticals. So this kind of opens a whole new bag as to what Suzy thought at the time and what she had experienced. Because really, one of the biggest issues, I think she does make the point in the book, that the big corporations, the pharmaceutical corporations, are making a lot of money off of drugs. So there's this whole balance between really each person having, each parent, each child having an individual choice as to whether that's going to work for them, versus this whole background of are we doing it even subconsciously because of the money being made or because of the self-interest. And that's a huge, it's hard to kind of wade through, but you want to open it up, Meredith? I think you have some personal experiences with this whole issue.
This is a juicy one. I resisted and disliked traditional medications for a long time. And that was not my going in position. I wanted natural or I realized, and I was talking to this wonderful therapist who she worked with funky kids and supporting the families, and she was also a social worker. And at one point she really questioned me. She's like, I see you're really against this. Like, why are you so against this? And she's like, can you just try it? And if it's not working or effective, stop. And so for me, it was kind of a how to be more neutral and how to explore all options and to really find out what is right for me and my family. So I would say people who have that like automatic block, that may be something to look at. And for me, it's been more helpful to have a softer, maybe in this case, maybe not in that case, have a more neutral stance with what it is. Because I have met some people that they swear it's been a lifesaver, and it's been a key part. And then, for me, I even asked Sam today in preparation for this, I was like, so do you think, generally speaking, medication has helped you? And he thought about it, and he was like, I think sometimes. And I think that's probably as good as it gets for us, is sometimes it's been helpful, sometimes maybe not. But
yeah, and it's like I said, it's a very thin line, because I have a nephew also that was just not coping well at all, and medication, tried it, then went off of it, and I've seen that happen where that choice is just right for them. And then I see the other aspect where if a child has ADD or ADHD, something, and maybe mild, more on the mild end of things, some parents are very readily, pressured or easily persuaded to immediately put the child on Adderall or Ritalin, and to where that we're having a huge number of children used to that. And I know it's interesting because my own son was ADD, and he could not on exams do well because he just couldn't get the test done. And then he discovered on his own, this is by the time he went to college, so he never did that well with grades, but by the time he went to college, he ended up with some Adderall, and he saw how effective it could be. Like in an exam, he went in, aced the test and walked out. But he made an individual choice that he didn't need it, But when you see that kind of performance, change, it's a choice, and so it's just something to really ponder. It's always an individual choice, and that's what everyone has to remember, because it's works for some people, and sometimes it works for a while and then not. So. Yeah. And
I never think it's 100% the answer. I'm always aware that this is maybe helping Sam manage some symptomology, but in terms of, managing himself and having life skills, having therapy, meditation, breathing techniques to manage stress, I never think that any pill is going to do one thing. Even if you have a heart condition, you still need to exercise and change your diet, So I think that's a pretty safe statement to make, is that there's other aspects that need to go into supporting you in becoming who you really want to be.
Well, and I think your point, rightfully so, Meredith, was that whenever you're too rigid one way, then you need to open up to whatever it is you just won't allow as an option. Yeah, absolutely. Either way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a good thing to look at what it is that you are so resistant to, and as Meredith was saying, to look at both sides as much as possible and question yourself why you're doing it a certain way, and is there another way to do it? And what are the benefits of maybe trying something? And agreed that changeability, because our bodies are changing, that medication that does work for a while won't work forever, because there's so much changing, energetic changing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would say too, there was a certain point for us. I really be thoughtful about what behavior you're trying to impact and kind of what the severity is. Like, we didn't do it lightly. Like, Sam was really at a point of such misery and self-harm that for us it felt life or death. Like, he was having a miserable time and he needed something. And I will say at other times, frankly, I would look at his behavior and I'm like, you know what, this is stressful for me. So maybe I'm the one that should take the medication and he's fine. So I just offer that. It's like, okay, how problematic is the behavior and to whom, and direct it that way. So
yeah, good point.
And the same could be said for teachers, I suppose. If the children are getting to it, maybe it's a teacher that needs something. Yeah.
Bring that teacher chocolate.
Whatever. But because Suzy does say, she does make this statement, pharmaceuticals don't cure autism because it's not an illness. And I think that's a really important point. No matter what you do choose, do it with consciousness around realizing that this is not an illness. It's not, you might be helping the child out, making their life easier in some respect, but not doing it from the standpoint that something's wrong with them and they need to be fixed and they need to get well and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Oh, I highly agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say too, I think it's important to we've had some bad psychiatrists and some good ones. And so really be attuned to what their goals are versus your goals. Do they have the attitude of, well, this is a chemical issue with your child, they're always going to have a chemical issue, and so they always need medication. And, for us, that was not a good fit, because I think there's a huge opportunity for change and growth over time, especially in a young person. So I didn't want anybody who was just going to always have medication. I wanted somebody who, let's pull everything off and see where we are. Let's give his body a chance on nothing and see what the issues are and what changes can be made. So I would say that's really important, that you don't get somebody who just writes it forever.
Yes, and it's even better to really find someone, even if it's not a doctor, to really support you in this whole idea of energy-based medicine, or that there is this whole other aspect. This is not just a physical body matter. It is, there's this whole energy piece around it. And there are many, that's coming out a lot in medicine with Bruce Lipton's work, and where it's becoming very, very clear that even on a scientific basis that there's a whole bigger piece to it energetically. And I think now it's easier to find that more, doctors or health professionals at least aware of that whole piece.
And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the level of connection that your child has. There's certain psychiatrists where, Sam didn't hurt himself or anybody else today, we're doing good, and he wouldn't, make eye contact with my child, and they're just, he didn't know him, or he wasn't interested, he didn't see anything wonderful and special and unique, and other than our psychiatrist now looks like Eva Longoria, like, my son did not have a hard sell there, but she, she stops and she talks and she knows Sam and she cares for him and she roots for him and she sees real positives. And so I just have to believe that energetically, so he gets so much more from her, even though you get the same bottle with the same name, there's a different energy behind it. There's a different goal behind it. There's a different care.
Yes, and you can see that now, Meredith. You probably couldn't even have seen that in the beginning or when you were starting on this whole journey.
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't have the language. It's like, oh, that doesn't feel good, and this one does feel better.
Yeah. Well, that's all my. Go ahead.
A learning process for the parents to pick up that language and to have the courage to speak up and and take the time to find someone who really has that fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say, and it's interesting, also consider kind of your child's age and ability.
Mm-hmm.
So now, Sam has much more say in, bless you, and how he feels, and is this the right person? Is this the right, how do you feel about this? And it's interesting. So I have a daughter. She's 18. We were just at the doctor's the other day, and I really wasn't happy about how he was talking to her, and I was pushing back a little bit. And again, it wasn't an angry thing, but it was a questioning. It was, you just came in and said it would be this way, and that doesn't feel right. I have another question, or can we do it this way? And I left, somewhat frustrated and feeling like this is not someone I can work with. There's a trust was a little broken in the exchange. And I got in the car, and my daughter was like, gosh, thank you so much for, she learned so much in watching that. And so make some of these things explicit, even if, your child isn't present with you in these exchanges, talk about what to expect and how to gauge someone that's on your team and working with you versus someone that's just, going through the motions. And so take that. That's I think a gift for the child to start thinking in those terms and give them language. It's like we were talking about, like I didn't have language back then, but we can share that now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we didn't really even talk about the children that are nonverbal and how to go through that process, but it would be a process of really sensing what the child's going through and that connection you have with the child, listening and trusting yourself as far as what that child needs as far as a health practitioner. So, well, that finishes everything I have to say about Chapter 8 or any of the questions I wanted to discuss. Do you have any other points you want to bring in before we say goodbye?
There's just one other point that Suzy's brought in about vaccination, is that it's not just the chemicals in the vaccine itself, it's the children picking up on the energy with which those vaccines were made, and the kind of like the energy, the intent of the pharmaceuticals, which adds a whole other layer to the question of whether or not to vaccinate, or how much we can work with children to shift that energy, or point it out to them, or maybe have them point it out to us, so that if you decide for vaccinations, that's just something else to discuss, or certainly ask them about and see how they're feeling about it.
Yes, and I think of this all the time when I go by Walgreens, and there's these huge signs saying, "Have you gotten your flu shot yet?" or "Did you get your shingles shot?" And I'm like, wow. This has got to be a moneymaker, because they just start bombarding, and they're looking at the 60, 70 plus generation just like they are the children. Like, oh, can we rope them all in and really make them believe they're going to get the flu or shingles? So it's definitely something that is not just it's kind of effervescent in our whole society, but because you could just be programmed constantly, driving to every Walgreens. Boy, do I need a shingle shot? Well, do I need a flu shot? You just be almost subtly programmed, and so it's really something that is really good to be aware of, no matter what, because there's just a great deal of subconscious pressure to think that you need these things, and yes, it comes off like they're doing. Oh, we're really doing the best for you because we don't want you to get shingles, we don't want you to get the flu, but it's really something to ask yourself, go within. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. I think there's two things about our culture at play. One is that fear-based, and so having that fear come at you, and then there's the capitalistic part, but then there's also the part that we like things fast and easy. And how much easier is it to take a pill than to go through therapy and really dig through all your hard stuff and learn some emotional skills, and or a pill. A pill might be easier. So I think as much as possible, to your point, Terrie, of having that awareness of what message is coming toward us, and to realize that we need to say no, and that you can like every time I walk up to that pharmacy window and I see those same things, I'm like, no, thank you, not me. And to just not let it just kind of be in your soup, but to
Right.
consciously, no, not me.
Well, and to know that that no matter what choice you make, because we all have choices, and we, well, I've had taken drugs before for various reasons, but just to know that no matter what, and Suzy makes the point in the chapter, the drug is always kind of messing with your biochemistry, and that both younger children and the elderly are far more vulnerable to this, like, messing around with biochemistry. They're really those drugs can have like effects that really, when they show up, they don't really know, or they kind of refuse to tie it back to the drug. And I know of many examples where that's the case. So yeah, just awareness, just more awareness.
Absolutely.
Around it. So very good. Well, it's been great. I've had fun discussing all this, and glad to have our audience here. We didn't have any questions tonight, but I think it's time we can sign off, call it a night, and we will be discussing chapters 9 and 10 next Monday. That'll wrap up the round 2 of Awesomism Book Club. These are Suzy Miller's Level 3 practitioners, and we really have fun being here. So thank you, Meredith, and thank you, Karilyn. And we'll see anyone else that wants to join us next Monday. It'll be in the morning, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Good night.
Excellent.
Good night, Terrie.
Okay. Thanks, y'all. Take care.